everybody, wanted to do a short little video today, and I get lots of questions and comments and people sending me offline messages and things like this about, stuff like, I'm having a really hard time catching these coyotes. I've got my traps out. They've been out like 4 weeks. I've not caught any coyotes, or there's tracks there near my sets, or I've got game cameras up and they're just walking past my sets, or I just can't catch them. I don't know what the deal is. I'm just not catching them. So I thought what I would do over the next, few weeks is I try to mix in some regular videos besides the, out on the trap line videos to try to help some folks that are having questions, because you can't always explain things in a comment or something like that. So today what I want to do is I want to talk for a few minutes about one of the most important, if not the most important thing that I think you can do to improve your trapping, improve your catches, just help you become a better trapper. And that is properties or location. Really, I guess location. So let's talk for a little bit about location. So what does that actually mean? What does location mean? To me, what location means is a couple different things. Number one, kind of in a macro version, and then number two, kind of in a micro version. So what is location in a macro version? So to me, location in a macro version is the properties that you have. In other words, not only the number of properties that you have to trap on, but the type of properties that you have to trap on. In other words, are there critters there? Is there predators there? To me, that's the most important thing of maybe trapping in general, is if you have one or two or three properties to trap on and that's all you have and there's not very many critters there, then obviously you're not going to be able to catch very many. If you have 25 properties and they're all really, really good, then that is going to increase your odds of being able to catch lots of predators. Now, are there lots of other things that you need to be able to do and be good at? Maybe you need to have, good commercial baits and lures. You need to be able to know how to bed your trap properly. You need to have proper equipment, good equipment. There's many other things besides that. I'm just throwing some out there. So there's lots of things that you need to be good at. But none of those things really make that much difference if you're not putting traps where the animals are. You can bed your traps in concrete. If there's not predators there, you're not going to catch them. You can have the best possible bait and lure. You can have the best equipment. You can have, all those kinds of things. But if you're not, and make the prettiest sets, the absolute prettiest sets, be the best at blending them in. But if the animals aren't there, you're not going to catch them. Professional trappers, and I'm not a professional trapper. I'm just an amateur guy that likes to trap. Been doing it for a while, but, I'm not getting paid by people that, to trap, or I'm not making lures, or I'm not selling trapping supplies or anything else like that. But the guys that do that, the really good guys that are catching tons of animals, they're in a place where there's tons of animals to catch. Clint Locklear didn't catch 150 cats in Tennessee. He caught them in western Texas because there were huge properties out there, 30, 40, 50,000 acre land with lots and lots of bobcats on it, right? Doesn't mean that he's not a great trapper. He is obviously a really, really good trapper. But you're not going to catch 150 cats in eastern Tennessee, probably, right? Mark June, where is Mark June catching most of his animals at? He's catching them in western Nebraska. He's catching them in Texas, right? And that list is long and distinguished of these guys that are catching enormous amounts of fur, but they're doing it in places where there's enormous amounts of property and enormous amounts of critters to catch. No matter where you're going to trap. Even Mark Zager in New York, he has got a lot of really good properties. This is just a guess on my part. I've never talked to Mark Zager. I've never met the guy. but I'm gonna guess that he has probably got lots and lots and lots of properties to trap on. And because of that, he's able to catch, 100 coyotes a year in New York or on the East Coast, or in the Eastern United States, which is very, very difficult to do. Anybody that's catching 100 coyotes a year in the Eastern United States is a very, very good trapper. To me, it's significantly harder to catch 100 coyotes a year in the Eastern United States than it is in the Western United States, just because, the amount of animals, the amount of land, and that's a whole nother discussion for a different day. But the point is, if you're gonna catch large numbers of critters, you gotta have good land. You gotta have lots of land, multiple pieces of property, and it's gotta be good land that holds predators, that holds, prey species, and that's gonna hold predators. So in a macro location, you've gotta have good properties, many properties, and they've gotta be properties that hold predators. Secondly, a micro location. You've got to be able to, at least from what I've seen, the guys that can really trap and the guys that consistently catch predators year after year after year after year after year. And what I've seen with just people riding with me or people that are friends of mine that I'm trying to teach how to trap, the hardest part for them is, okay, now I have a good piece of property. Where do I put these traps at? Exactly where do I put them? And some of it's kind of obvious, you got a 4-road intersection coming together. Okay. Or you got tons of coyote scat in this one spot. Okay. Some of it's kind of obvious. But what I see over and over and over again is the not so obvious spots that they miss. And I think a lot of that just comes from lack of experience and just lack of confidence in being able to put traps in a place where maybe you don't see a lot of sign, or maybe that you don't see something that's very, very obvious. So I'll give you an example. You guys were watching some of my videos I had recently of some farms that I was trapping. And one of those farms I had never trapped on before. It was 1,100 acres. And I got that piece of property from a friend of mine through the landowner. So this friend of mine who had known the landowners, had hunted there, turkey hunted, deer hunted there, years and years and years over the years. And he said, hey, these landowners are having a real problem with predators. Would you be interested in trapping? So it's kind of a word of mouth through a friend, right? A guy that I had known and worked with in a law enforcement field for years. And then he knew these people. So that's how I got that piece of property. And when I went over there, he was there along with a couple of the landowners. And we were talking about setting up this piece of property and kind of how it was going to, the logistics of how long I was going to be there. And I'm like, probably 10 to 14 days. And all this kind of stuff. And I remember both of them at points were like, well, how many traps do you think you're going to put out? 30, 40 traps, how many traps you're going to put out? And I remember telling them a dozen, 15, maybe 20 at the max. And they were very, very surprised by that. But they're people that are not trappers, right? They're people that, don't know a lot about trapping. They're hunters. They're, really good deer hunters, really good turkey hunters, but they've never trapped really. So they don't know, they don't understand, right? But there's a lot of people that do trap that don't understand. So the most traps I had on this 1,100 acre piece of property was 14 different traps over there. And I just come off that place within the last week. And when I went back and looked at the numbers, I ended up catching 24 animals there on that 1,100 acres in 10 days or 11 days, whatever it was, 11 days, I think. And, 10 check days plus the day of setting, so 11 days total. And I'm there, and I caught these 24 critters, and when I went back and looked at the 14 traps, right, I had 14 traps out there. That doesn't mean 14 locations, I mean 14 traps. It was really 12 locations, because 2 of the locations, I had 2 traps basically 20 feet apart, 20, 25 feet apart. So that's really 12 locations, okay? And in those 12 locations, all the critters that I caught came from 9 of those locations. So 14 total traps, 12 locations, and out of that 12 locations, I caught everything in 9 of those locations. So in other words, 3 locations were basically just blanked out. And then 9 was where I caught everything at. So of the 24 critters, that was only 9 locations on that 1,100 acres of land. So what does that mean? It means that A, I've got this good piece of property. It's never been trapped before. It's got a lot of really good features on it. It's got big woods. It's got food plots. It's got bottomland along the creek. It's got big fields. It's got a little bit of everything. That's why there's so many critters there. There's bears there. There's coyotes. There's bobcats. There's, raccoons, possums. I did not see any fox, nor did I catch any fox there. That's probably because the coyotes killing them. But so there's lots of predators there. And in that whole 1,100 acres, basically it was whittled down to 9 locations where we caught every critter. So why is that? Why is it only 9 locations? Well, there were big chunks of that 1,100 acres that were just big woods. They were just big woods. There was really nothing there to hold the predators. Maybe they move through those big woods. I'm sure they do. I mean, if you've ever looked at the way like coyotes move, and let's say you have a circle and they're all over the place. I mean, everywhere within that circle, those coyotes eventually move, but there's places within that circle that they move all the time versus places that they just get to every couple weeks, right? So those big woods, maybe they move through those places once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever it is. But there's really not much there for them. What food is there for them to eat in big timber, right? Squirrels, maybe a few mice here and there, a few chipmunks here and there. Not a lot of stuff. There's not rabbits living in that big timber. There's not a lot of things living in that big timber, right? Not a large amount of mice, voles, pack rats, chipmunks, rabbits, turkeys, deer. There's not a lot of stuff living in those big woods like that for those critters to eat on. So they're coming out into those bottomlands, those food plot areas, those other areas, especially those edges between the big woods and farmland, or the edges between big woods and cropland, or the edges between big woods and food plots, those kinds of places that are going to hold those rabbits and turkeys and deer and mice and pack rats and voles and all the different things that predators are eating on and preying upon, right? So it's incumbent upon us to not only have this good big piece of property, but then be able to whittle that big piece of property down and say, okay, these are the areas that I'm looking at. Not just road intersections, which I think every trapper goes, oh, road intersections, put a trap there, put 2 traps there, right? But other things like ridges, and where we are multiple fences and ridges come together, and maybe 2 or 3 drainages come together, and there's 2 or 3 creeks there, and there's also a fence there, and there's also an edge of a crop line between a field and a big food plot, where there's lots of these other things that are all coming together on edges that are going to hold prey. And then that's where you're going to catch predators. Like this one spot where, if you watch the videos, it's a creek crossing where the animals they're following the 2-track and they're crossing the creek. And it's really the only spot for them to cross. A bunch of the other creeks got 4 or 5 foot like rock ledges on it. There's tons of really, really thick brush. They're just not going to move through that. And is that just the only thing that's funneling together is the creek? No, there's edge this way, and there's an edge this way. And on the other side of the creek, there's a big food plot, which creates 4 more edges. And then there's all this stuff that's kind of coming together, and all these different game trails. And if you really start thinking about it, in that one little area between where that creek is and where the 2-track crosses the creek, there's like 7 edges of some kind. There's the creek, there's the drainage, there's this trail, there's this trail, there's this edge, there's this edge, there's this edge, and there's this edge. Everything's coming together there. Everything is going to be funneled there. Just like if you're deer hunting and you're looking to put your deer stand up where you can sit there with your bow, you're looking for the areas where those deer are going to funnel. They're going to walk through underneath your tree, maybe moving from a deer bedding area to a food plot, to a feeding area, and then moving back and forth. And how are those deer going to do that? Well, they're going to run this edge. They're going to run this ridge. They're going to run this saddle. They're going to run this creek bottom. They're looking for cover. They're also not too far from the bedding area and not too far from the feeding area. Predators are the same thing. So you've got to have the macro location, And then you got to have your micro location. And sometimes the micro location is not what we always think it is. It's like, okay, it's going to be put right here because this is where the edges are. This is where everything's coming together. And I have this really nice tuft of grass here that I'm going to use as my backing. Boom, that's where my micro location is. Edge, 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 tuft of grass. Boom, okay? Versus this big, giant 1,100 acres. Okay, so macro, micro. Hope that makes sense to everybody. And so the first thing is make sure that you have good locations. Make sure that you have good pieces of land, multiple pieces of land. You can never have too much land. And then once you find that land, find these locations, not just 3 and 4 way 2-track intersections that everybody can see and everybody wants to trap on, but look for these other edges, ridge edges, saddle edges, creek edges, drainages that are all coming together, different edges of big timber versus farmland and food plot edges and all these different things. And then once you narrow that down, then look around for your sign and then narrow down your micro location to this tuft of grass because it's along this edge, I've got sign here or whatever. The hard part is when you don't have sign. Like I sit on a new piece of land today and I did not see a lot of sign on this particular piece of land. Why is that? Well, number one, there's a lot of grass and a lot of tall turf there in this grass. So I didn't see a lot. There's not a lot of roads running through this land. So at some point you just got to go, okay, I've got edge, 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 edge. I'm setting here even though I don't see sign. And that really just comes from experience and from confidence of setting those places. And there's going to be plenty of times that I'm wrong. I'm always curious to see how that works out. Was I right? Was my gut telling me right? Or was I wrong? And then if I was wrong, I was wrong. And I learned from that. And I go, okay, for whatever reason, that place did not pay off. And then I try to figure out why. So I hope that helps. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, I'm going to start talking about some other little topics that I hope will help you. If there's anything specific that I missed in locations, again, I'm trying to keep this, not super long. If I missed something, put it in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer it. Good luck out there on the trap line. Keep catching critters and keep putting out traps.